Hi, today we're going to get started on Simplicity 9789 and we're going to make this ruched top. I've already made these pants and I love them. This is a cute little pattern. Now, I like the ruched top, not a big fan of the bow over the shoulder, not a cold shoulder person. So what I did was I cut the top a second time, a reverse image of the top, and I'm actually going to put a shoulder in on this side that isn't ruched, so it's flat. So the way this garment is constructed is there's two pieces to the top. They're both the same, and that is piece number one. So piece number one is the front and the back, and you cut two of these. I cut two extra ones that are shorter. I cut them because I just need the shoulder seam. So I cut two, let's see, this goes this way. So I cut two that were truncated here because I really just need this. This is going to be that other shoulder seam that goes on the non-ruched side. So this is the under section of the ruched piece. So there's this section of the garment. This is the armhole. And this would be, if I was going to do the one shoulder, it would look like this, right? And there would be a bow here, which is simple to put on if you decide to go that route. The instructions are very, very good. This way, I'm going to add this shoulder piece on this side. So it's almost going to be like a faux surplice top. So this is the under construction. And then the ruched part is piece two. And this is you can't get much simpler than this. Piece two, it's this big long piece, and the front and the back are both piece two, and you ruche both of them, and then you add them to the base piece, piece one, and sew them together. So it's pretty simple. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the gathering stitches. So we need, look at how big this armhole is. So we need to do 2 rows of basting stitches along here because that's going to have some gathering, and then 2 rows of basting stitches along here, and 2 rows of basting stitches along here. On each piece, we have one for the front and one for the back. So you want to use the longest stitch on your machine. You want to leave tails, so you're going to sew this and leave tails, 2 rows, this and leave tails on either end. These should be separated. And also you want to sew, this is a 5/8 inch seam allowance garment. So you want to sew one at 3/8 of an inch, 1 row of basting stitches, and 1 row at 7/8 of an inch or an inch, because you want the stitches to be out, the basting stitches to be out of the regular stitching channel or track, because you don't want them to get caught in there. If they do, then they're more of a nuisance to pull out. This way you can just slide them all out when you're done with them. So we're going to go baste both of these pieces on all 3 sides. I wanted to mention before we get any further along, I made Simplicity 9788, and you'll see a picture of it here. To go with this top. I thought the two of them would be really cute together. It's essentially a very similar skirt than the one here. However, it has a little bit more style detail. It's longer and it's a little bit more casual. This was a little bit too formal for the look that I was going for. I wanted something that was more fun and casual. So having said that, you want to make sure when you're cutting your fabric that you know which is the right side. It's so much easier when you get to this point of construction because this is a solid and it looks very similar on both sides, but I always want to keep the same side. So for the top and the bottom and each piece, I want them to be essentially the same. So we have done all the gathering stitches along the channels on the sides and the arm. And now I'm going to sew the shoulder seams together on my overlay and the shoulder seams together on my top. So I'm going to put these right sides together. And I know they're the right sides because I have marking pins in them. So I'm going to stitch this overlay. Now I haven't made this garment, I'm making it with you. So we will see how this comes out as we move along on our little venture here. So there's the shoulder seam for the overlay. And then I'm going to take piece 1, which I have 4 pieces, 2 full and 2 half ones. So here is my piece 1, and this is the shoulder seam. This fabric had some marks on it, so unfortunately I've had to use, be careful about how I put these together. Okay, so here we have our overlay piece and our top piece, both stitched at the shoulder seam. Be careful not to catch your tail threads of your basting stitches in that shoulder seam. It'll just be more difficult to pull in the long run. Now we want to finish this neck edge. So we're going to sew these right sides together. So I'm going to open up my overlay. So it's the right side facing up. And then open up my, you can see this is my neck edge. Put this out of the way. So here's my neck edge. And then here is my structure garment. I'm gonna sew these. I had to be careful, there was some stains on this fabric, and had to make sure that they were out of the way or on the wrong side. Check your fabric, always check your fabric. So this is the neck edge of the front and the back. So we're going to stitch these together, and you wanna start at this shoulder seam because that's critical, and you can take one of your seam allowances and push it to the left and one pushing it to the right, and then you can just butt these seams together beautifully. You can hear my iron percolating over there. And then I'm going to do the same thing at this end. I'm going to pin this end here. And then pin this all the way down. So I'm going to use my straight stitch. I'm going to use my straight stitch on this because I don't need it to stretch. It's the neck edge. I'd prefer that it didn't stretch anyway. And I'm going to stitch this neck edge, and then I'll serge it, and then I'm going to understitch it. And when I understitch it, so now I'm on the other side here. Let me just back up here. I'm on the other side, so I'm going to pin this other side. When you understitch something, you stitch the seam allowance to the facing. So it's structural, you don't see it, it's not decorative. And what it does is it helps roll in the facing. So in this case, we're going to understitch the seam allowance to the structure garment as opposed to the overlay, because we don't see the structure garment, it's just there to keep the overlay in place. I don't know if that doesn't make sense. You'll see it in the next reel. we'll go over it actually how it's done. So here's my neck edge, and that's pinned, and I'm going to sew this all the way around. Now for my added on shoulder hack, I don't have a second piece. This is only going to be one layer, and this is my neck edge here. So my thoughts are that I will serge this and then just turn it under and top stitch it. I think I'll use a single needle, but you have the option, you could use a twin needle. It would be a little stretchier. Again, it's around the neck. I don't need it to stretch. I just need to be able to get it over my head. So here's my little extra shoulder piece. Like I said, I just serged it and did a little baby hem on the inside, so that looks fine. And then my shirt top with the overlay, you can see because we butted the seams, I have a really great juncture there. And then I understitched this. So this piece is my inner piece. It's the piece you're not going to see, and I stitched my seam allowance to that piece very close to the seam. I actually did it from this side so I can run it through the machine, and with my fingers underneath, I make sure that I'm pulling the seam allowance towards the underpiece, which is essentially my lining or my facing, and stitching the seam allowance to that. And what that does is it creates a little bit of a ridge. So this hasn't even been pressed yet, and I end up with this really nice finished neckline. So understitching is a really important technique to know about. Now here comes the fun part. We have our underpiece and our overpiece, and we're going to stitch them together. All right, so we're going to stitch our underpieces, and we're going to do them wrong sides together. Essentially what we want to do is create one garment, piece of garment. And, you know, if you have a really expensive fabric that, or a heavy fabric that you don't want to double up, you don't want your shirt doubled up, you can make this underpiece, this piece one, the structure of your garment, out of a lining, and it will work perfectly fine. I happen to have enough of this apple green knit that I could use it for this purpose, but certainly you could use a lining and it would be less bulky and it would slide on a little bit nicer than this is going to be like a t-shirt. It's going to be a fancy t-shirt, but it's going to be a t-shirt. So the first thing I want to do, which isn't in the instructions, is I want to go through this neckline and just kind of pin it down because I don't want that shifting on me. And now that I've done the work to make this really pretty neckline, I'm just going to go around and make sure that it's where I want it to be, because you wouldn't want to get to the finished garment and find out that you had sewn it in and your neckline was like this when it really needs to be on that seam, So I'm just going to go around and pin that down. It just takes a minute and it will make a difference in my finished garment being constructed better. Okay, so now that I have that done, I can take each piece. I'm going to use these ruching stitches to gather them up. So I want to take 2 of the top stitches or bottom stitches, either one. The bobbin stitches tend to work better sometimes, depending on your machine, but you want the 2 top tails. And I'm just going to pull them and try to gather this as evenly as I can to make it the same length as my base piece. Now you want to be careful you don't pull it so much that you pull the pieces that you have up at the top out. So you can kind of drag it from one end and then go back and drag it from the other end. So it's pretty close to being the same side. It's almost there. You can see now why we pinned this top, because we don't want this shifting around on us. But we want all this gathering to be balanced and this piece to be the same as this one. So I'm going to, I gathered it a little bit too much, and as I balance it, I'm going to let a little bit of it out. Right. That's pretty good. Look at that. That looks pretty good. So now we're going to pin that. And you don't want any gathering here down at the hem. That will just get in your way. We're going to pin it to try to keep these ruffles as flat as possible. And then we're going to stitch these pieces together. Now, if you're at all nervous, you can go ahead and just baste them together and make sure that you're happy with the way it looks. I'm just trying to make this as balanced as I can. Okay, so there is my first piece, and I'm going to do that to the armhole and the other side. So I have my armhole is gathered and the other side of my ruched piece is gathered, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the other half of my garment. All right, I have one side done. So this is the right side of my garment. We're just attaching these 2 pieces to make them one unit. And this is my neck edge, right? It's all completed. I've just pinned it here so it's not shifting out of shape. And I'm going to baste along the armhole. I'm going to go off. Don't back tack, and then don't turn it. Go off, and then come back on again. I'm going to baste across here. I'm going to baste down this side, and I'm also going to baste the hem, because if I don't, you'll see that one piece, this overlay is going to flop down. So I'm just going to pin this and I'm going to baste it. Now you can baste it in the seam allowance. I would do it a little shy of the 5/8 inch seam allowance. I don't want to see them. I don't want to see the basting stitches when I sew the seams together. So the easiest way to avoid that is to baste it inside the seam allowance as opposed to right on the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't go too far in, but you know, just a little bit. And then that should fit perfectly because we cut the same size, and they do. So we're gonna go baste all of that, and we're gonna do the same thing for the rest of this on the other side. All right, we finished stitching up these panels. We have the base panel, which I'm actually using my fashion fabric, but you could use a lining, and then this ruching panel that goes on top. So I've done it to the front and the back. The ruching goes down the side, around the armhole, all the way around the armhole, and on the other side. Now, I, once again, didn't do this little tie here. I actually made a second piece to go on. I'm going to show you how to do that. But if you made the tie at this point, you can just skip to the side seams. Now I have my extra piece to put the shoulder on, and I need to apply that to my front and my back. So I'm going to take the back, and I'm just going to baste this on the inside, much like I basted the ruching, and this is unruched. I need to leave the seam allowance here because this is the armhole, and in this photo, this goes under the arm, right? So I'm going to baste the back side just along this side seam here, and then the same on the other side seam. This one can go below the seam allowance on here because this is getting a facing, so this is going under the arm. And then this is where it gets a little tricky here. I'm going to do the same thing to my attached other side without trying to twist everything. So I'm going to apply my sleeve piece. All these little threads drive me crazy, but I don't want to pull them out until I get the seams sewn. So I need to leave a seam allowance on this side because this edge is finished. And then over on this side where the armhole is, I'm going to apply my piece, my finished piece below the armhole edge. So I'm just going to go back and baste those on so it will be all one unit. And then I'm going to sew the side seams, which is pretty simple. So this, you can see now, if I fold it, now I have two shoulders, right? When I sew my side seams together, I will have a complete neckline, front and back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to baste those on, and then I'm going to sew the side seams. This calls for a zipper. I have issues with putting zippers in knit garments. First of all, there is so much fabric on this side seam. It's going to be extremely bulky, and the zipper isn't going to help it any. Zipper's tape is stiff, and this is so soft and floaty, and it's a knit. I should be able to pull it over my head. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm bypassing the zipper and sewing both side seams. We are almost finished with 9789 Simplicity. I sewed the side seams. I didn't need a zipper. You don't need a zipper. It's pretty stretchy. And the zipper is just going to cause you angst because there's so much fabric here with all this gathering that I think putting in a zipper is absolutely silly and not necessary if you have, your fabric has lots of really good stretch. So I also hemmed my bottom edge. I just rolled it under, I serged it and rolled it under, and I used my stretch stitch. And you're not going to see it because there's so much gathering on this, it kind of crunches up around your waist. The next thing I want to talk about is the arms, to close off the arms. Now, they talk about using purchased bias tape, and again, I am not a fan. I have this fabric. I mean, this is all the fabric I have left from 3 yards, and I made a skirt, a long skirt, which you'll see to go with this, and this top. So that's good. That's great. I don't have big chunks of fabric going into the landfill. I might as well use this as my bias tape. It's stretchy, it's knit, and it looks like the fabric. So you want to, in order to make bias tape to finish off an arm or a neck edge for that matter, you want to measure your armhole. And I just pin my piece. This is 1.5 inches wide. And I pin it and then I walk it all, without stretching it, all the way around my armhole. And this armhole for mine happened to be 25 inches. So I cut this piece of tape, this piece of fabric, to 23 inches. I want it a little bit shorter because I want it to suck up some of the extra that's floating around, and it's not waffly. And then you want to make sure that you don't twist it, and you fold it right sides together and stitch it so you have a big loop. Right. After you have a loop, you're going to, I'm just going to put a pin in here so it's like a loop. Then you're going to fold it wrong sides together. So the right sides are on the outside, and you're going to pin it all the way around your armhole. Now, these armholes are the same front and back. They're symmetrical. So you can take your piece of bias tape that you've made, and from the seam edge, you can find the center of the other side and use that for the shoulder seam, because you want to distribute that little bit of ease that you're taking in on the armhole. And then just with it folded in on itself, apply it, stitch it all the way around the armhole. I used my straight stitch. This does not need to stretch. I don't want my armhole stretching out of shape. So now that's finished, and you have a couple of options. If you want like a t-shirt look, you have this really nice bias tape. You can just run a little stitch here right next to the seam to keep the seam allowance from like kind of popping around. Because I want something a little cleaner, I'm going to turn mine to the inside and top stitch it. So you won't see it. I'll have a little bit more of a clean look. And since I've already top stitched the neck edge, it will be fine. You could also apply the bias tape to this neck edge. You only see about this much because it's high up on the neck, so I wasn't that worried about it, but I do want a nicely finished armhole. So I'm going to do the same for this side with all this ruffles going on here. I'm going to apply the self-made bias tape, and then our top with our surplice top without the shoulder strap is finished and ready to wear, and you can see it matched up with the skirt that I made from Simplicity 9788. Looks really cute. Happy sewing. Bye.